The morning of December 14th, 1944, Guadalcanal. Staff Sergeant William Chen crouches in his foxhole at the edge of the Lunga perimeter, his M1 Garand resting across his thighs. The weapon's walnut stock is warm against his leg, the gas cylinder gleaming dull in the moonlight that filters through the palm canopy overhead. 200 meters away, waves crash against the volcanic sand, but Chen's attention is fixed on the tree line, where shadows are beginning to separate from shadows. His fingers trace the rifle's operating rod, feeling the smooth steel that distinguishes this weapon from every other service rifle in the Pacific. 8 rounds, 30-06 Springfield cartridges, seated perfectly in the internal magazine, ready to fire as fast as he can pull the trigger. No bolt to work, no manual cycling, just aim, fire, aim, fire. The Japanese soldiers moving through that tree line carry Arisaka Type 38 rifles, bolt-action weapons that their grandfathers would recognize. 5 rounds in an internal magazine, each shot requiring the soldier to lift the bolt handle, pull it back, push it forward, lock it down before the next round can fire. Chen learned the Garand at Camp Pendleton, where instructors called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. But here in the jungle, the old-timers in his platoon had different opinions. Too heavy, they said, burns through ammunition too fast, a rifle for men who can't shoot straight with a bolt-action Springfield. Those old-timers weren't here tonight. Watching 15 Japanese infantry moving in a disciplined skirmish line through the undergrowth, each man carrying the long barrel of an Arisaka, each man trained in the methodical rhythm of bolt-action fire. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Movement at 70 meters. Chen can see them clearly now, bayonets fixed to rifle muzzles moving in coordinated rushes that speak to professional training and careful planning. The Japanese advance because their tactical manuals tell them American Marines carry bolt-action rifles just like theirs, that any return fire will come in the same measured, methodical pace they've trained to exploit. That assumption is about to cost them everything. 22 hours. The Japanese surge forward. Their timing coordinated. Their spacing professional. Chen raises his Garand to his shoulder. The rear sight perfectly aligned with the front post. His breathing steadies as he tracks the lead figure through the aperture. The enemy riflemen advance in rushes, fire, work the bolt, advance, fire again. Their entire tactical doctrine built around the assumption that American return fire will pause between shots, that every Marine needs time to cycle his bolt action before shooting again. Chen whispers into the darkness, "Hold, wait for it." The first shot cracks through the jungle at 23 hours. Chen's Garand cycles immediately, the spent cartridge ejecting as the next round chambers automatically. Second shot, third, fourth. The semi-automatic action operates flawlessly, each trigger pull sending another 30-06 downrange without Chen lifting his cheek from the stock, without losing his sight picture, without the pause that bolt action requires. Fifth shot, sixth, seventh, eighth. The distinctive metallic ping of the unblocked clip ejecting, the bolt locking open on an empty chamber. 12 seconds. 8 rounds of aimed fire in 12 seconds while the Japanese struggle to work their bolts, to cycle their actions, to chamber fresh rounds from their 5-shot magazines. The lead Japanese figure crumples, then the second, then the third as Chen's Marines join the volley. 8 semi-automatic rifles firing in sequence, each Marine emptying his clip in rapid succession. Chen slams a fresh clip into his Garand, the bolt snapping forward to chamber the first round, and he's firing again while the Japanese are still working their second shots. The assault falters at 60 meters, then breaks. The surviving Japanese pull back into the jungle, dragging their wounded, their carefully planned night attack shattered by a volume of fire they never expected, never trained to counter, never believed American Marines could deliver. By dawn, on December the 15th, Chen's section counted 47 spent clips scattered around their foxholes, 376 rounds of 30-06, fired in under 3 minutes of contact. The Japanese had left 8 dead in the tall grass at 70 meters, their Arisaka rifles still loaded with unfired cartridges, bolts half open where the men had died, trying to cycle their next shots. Chen picked up one of the enemy rifles that morning, worked the bolt mechanism. Smooth, precise, reliable, but slow. Each shot required lifting the bolt handle, pulling it back to extract the spent case, pushing it forward to chamber a fresh round from the 5-round magazine, then pressing down to lock the action. Deadly in the right hands, but not fast enough against semi-automatic fire. The mathematics carved itself into Chen's mind as he cleaned his Garand. 8 rounds in 12 seconds versus 5 rounds, cycled manually at whatever pace a man could work his bolt under fire. A Japanese rifleman might manage 15 aimed shots per minute if he stayed calm, if his hands didn't shake, if enemy bullets weren't snapping overhead. Chen's M1 could deliver 40 shots per minute, maybe 50 if he pushed it. The gap wasn't small. It was a chasm that swallowed assault waves whole. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Puller walked the perimeter that morning, counting bodies, counting spent brass. Chen showed him the Arisaka, demonstrated the bolt action, explained how the Japanese had advanced expecting to face bolt-action Springfields like their grandfathers had carried in the Great War. They trained for rifle versus rifle, Chen told Puller. Bolt for bolt. They didn't train for this. Puller nodded, made notes in his field book, asked Chen to demonstrate the clip change under simulated fire. 8 rounds, ping, fresh clip, 8 more rounds. 24 seconds total, 16 rounds downrange. A Japanese rifleman with his Arisaka might fire 6 shots in the same time frame, maybe 8 if he moved fast and forgot about aiming. The story of how this advantage came to exist began not in the jungles of Guadalcanal, but in the industrial heartland of America. In factories that understood warfare was becoming a contest of production as much as courage. Springfield Armory in Massachusetts had delivered 1,200,000 M1 Garands by the end of 1942, another 2 million by June of 1943. Winchester, Repeating Arms Company, added 800,000 more. Harrington and Richardson Arms Company contributed 500,000. The numbers climbed toward 5.4 million rifles by 1944, enough to put a semi-automatic weapon in the hands of every American infantryman from the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of the Pacific. Every squad, every fire team, every rifleman carried the same advantage Chen had discovered in his foxhole. 8 rounds without stopping. Gas-operated cycling, no manual bolt work required. The Japanese industrial reports painted a different picture, though Chen wouldn't see those documents until years after the war ended. The Nagoya arsenal produced Type 38 and Type 99 rifles at peak capacity, maybe 40,000 per month when steel allocation permitted, when bombing raids didn't shut down the assembly lines, when raw materials could reach the factory through Allied submarine blockades. Quality suffered as production demands increased. Metallurgy became inconsistent. Finish work grew rough. But the design remained unchanged. 5-round internal magazine, bolt action, manual cycling required for every shot. The Imperial Japanese Army had standardized on a reliable, proven system that worked perfectly for the warfare they expected to fight. They hadn't prepared for the warfare they actually faced. Sergeant Takashi Nakamura's diary, captured on Bougainville in February of 1944, recorded the shock in precise characters. The Americans do not fire like soldiers. They fire like machines. One trigger, one bullet, another trigger, another bullet. No pause, no bolt, no stopping. We charge with courage and die before we can answer their fire. The entry was dated March 12th, written after a failed night assault that left 37 Japanese dead against 2 American casualties. Nakamura had counted muzzle flashes, timed the intervals between shots, calculated rates of fire that exceeded anything in Japanese tactical manuals. His unit had trained to exploit the pause between bolt-action shots, the moment when an enemy rifleman lifted his bolt handle and became vulnerable. That moment didn't exist when the enemy carried Garands. The tactical adaptation began immediately across the Pacific theater. Japanese commanders studied the new American fire patterns, developed countermeasures, issued new orders. Night attacks shifted from frontal assaults to infiltration tactics, small groups moving through terrain too broken for overlapping fields of fire. Banzai charges gave way to suicide attacks by individual soldiers who could close distance faster than rifle fire could stop them. Cave fighting replaced open field maneuvers. Combat at ranges too close for the Garand's advantages to matter. The Japanese adapted because they had to. The alternative was annihilation. But adaptation took time, and time favored the side with superior firepower. On Tarawa, in November of 1943, Marines advanced across Horitz beaches, under fire from Japanese positions 50 meters inland, their Garands delivering suppressive fire that kept enemy heads down long enough for assault teams to reach the seawall. On Guadalcanal, in February of 1944, rifle squads used coordinated fire to pin Japanese defenders while demolition teams moved up with satchel charges. The pattern repeated across the Pacific. Superior rate of fire created tactical opportunities that American commanders exploited with increasing sophistication. Chen received his promotion to gunnery sergeant on Bougainville, where his section had become the battalion's preferred unit for close-range firefights. He trained new Marines on clip discipline, on maintaining steady fire while moving, on exploiting the psychological impact of continuous shooting. "They expect you to pause," he told his men. "They expect you to duck down and work a bolt like their rifles do. When you don't pause, when you keep firing, their timing gets disrupted. That's when they make mistakes." The lessons spread through the division, codified in training manuals distributed to rifle companies preparing for the next assault. The industrial gap widened as American production accelerated and Japanese capacity degraded under sustained bombing. By mid-1944, U.S. forces carried not just superior individual weapons, but superior logistics, superior training, superior doctrine built around the capabilities those weapons provided. The Japanese fought with increasing desperation, their tactics growing more extreme as conventional methods failed against American firepower. The war had become a contest between industrial systems, and the system that could equip every rifleman with semi-automatic weapons held decisive advantages at every level of combat. Chen's section transferred to the 2nd Marine Division in March of 1944, shipping out of New Zealand aboard the transport USS Cambria with their destinations sealed until they cleared Auckland Harbour. The orders came down through regimental command on the 3rd day at sea. Saipan, largest island in the Mariana Chain, 15 miles long and 5 miles wide, defended by 31,000 Japanese troops under Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito. Intelligence reports described reinforced concrete bunkers, interlocking fields of fire, defensive positions under construction since Pearl Harbor. Chen studied the aerial photographs pinned to the bulkhead in his squad bay, Mount Tapachau, rising 1,500 feet above sea level in the island's center, sugarcane fields providing concealment for defensive positions, beaches offering no cover for advancing infantry. The amphibious assault began at 0830 hours on June 15, 1944, Chen's landing craft grinding across the coral reef toward beaches designated Red 1 and Red 2. Japanese artillery opened fire while the Marines were still 300 yards from shore, 25mm guns and 150mm howitzers walking their rounds across the surf zone with practiced precision. Chen counted the seconds between shell impacts, calculated rates of fire that told him the enemy had survived 3 days of preliminary bombardment with their heavy weapons intact. The Japanese had learned from Tarawa, had dug deeper, had built better, had prepared for exactly this kind of assault. Chen hit the beach at 0907 with his Garand held high, the seawater dripping from the rifle's barrel as he sprinted across white coral sand toward the tree line 40 meters inland. The Japanese had positioned their rifle companies in camouflaged positions among the palm trees, individual fighting holes connected by communication trenches that allowed movement without exposure to direct fire. Arisaka rifles opened up from concealed positions, bolt-action fire delivered with the methodical precision that Japanese infantry training emphasized, aim shots, deliberate target selection, conservation of ammunition to sustain defensive fire throughout a long engagement. The tactical problem revealed itself immediately. Japanese defenders had positioned themselves at ranges between 50 and 150 meters, distances that favored accurate rifle fire over rapid fire, terrain that negated the close-range advantages Chen had exploited on previous islands. The enemy had adapted their defensive scheme to counter American semi-automatic weapons, had chosen fighting positions that emphasized marksmanship over rate of fire, had forced the engagement into conditions where bolt-action rifles retained competitive advantages. Chen realized the Japanese had studied American tactics, had developed countermeasures, had learned to fight differently. The first Japanese position opened fire from a spider hole dug beneath the roots of a coconut palm. The muzzle flash, barely visible through carefully arranged vegetation that provided both concealment and a clear field of fire across the beach approaches. Chen tracked the source through his rifle sights, estimated the range at 90 meters, well within the Garand's effective envelope, but at a distance where the enemy rifleman could take careful aim and deliver precision fire. The Japanese soldier worked his Arisaka with professional competence. Fire, bolt action, chamber fresh round, acquire target, fire again. But his rate of fire remained limited by the mechanical requirements of manual cycling. Chen established a firing position behind a coral outcropping, braced his Garand against the rock face for stability, and engaged the Japanese sniper with rapid semi-automatic fire. 8 rounds in succession, aimed fire directed at the base of the coconut palm, where muzzle flashes had revealed the enemy position. Follow-up shots that kept the Japanese soldier suppressed, while Chen's squad maneuvered for better position. The enemy returned fire sporadically, bolt-action shots that came too slowly to prevent American movement, too infrequently to maintain effective suppression of advancing Marines. Staff Sergeant Murphy's squad advanced through the palm grove using fire and movement tactics adapted for semi-automatic weapons, half the squad providing covering fire, while the other half bounded forward to new positions. The Japanese had prepared for this kind of advance, had established interlocking fields of fire that covered likely approach routes, had positioned automatic weapons to supplement their bolt-action rifles with sustained fire capabilities. A Type 99 light machine gun opened fire from a position 200 meters inland, 7.7mm rounds cutting through palm fronds and sending coral chips flying from defensive positions occupied by advancing Marines. Chen's section concentrated their fire on the machine gun position. 12 Garands, delivering coordinated volleys that forced the Japanese crew to cease firing and take cover. The psychological impact of sustained, semi-automatic fire remained effective even at extended ranges. Enemy soldiers who exposed themselves to engage individual targets found themselves receiving return fire from multiple sources, rapid fire that arrived faster than bolt-action weapons could respond. The Japanese machine gunners attempted to resume firing several times, but concentrated Garand fire kept them pinned down long enough for Marine assault teams to maneuver within grenade range. The assault on the machine gun position demonstrated how American infantry tactics had evolved to exploit semi-automatic weapons capabilities. Chen's Marines used suppressive fire to fix enemy positions in place, then maneuvered under covering fire to positions where grenades and automatic weapons could finish the engagement. The Japanese defended courageously, but their defensive scheme depended on mutual support between positions, coordination that became impossible when sustained rifle fire prevented movement and communication. Individual fighting holes became isolated strongpoints that could be reduced systematically by Marines who could deliver overwhelming fire superiority at decisive points. By 1400 hours, Chen's company had advanced 800 meters inland from the beach, a rate of progress that exceeded planning estimates despite encountering prepared defensive positions manned by experienced troops. The Japanese had fought skillfully, had used terrain to their advantage, had demonstrated tactical competence that made every yard costly for attacking Marines. But they had fought with bolt-action rifles against semi-automatic weapons, had accepted a fundamental disadvantage in rates of fire that American tactics exploited ruthlessly. Japanese positions fell not because of superior courage or better training, but because American riflemen could deliver more rounds per minute at decisive moments in each engagement. Chen counted his ammunition expenditure as his section consolidated their positions in the captured palm grove. 22 clips fired, 176 rounds of .30-06 expended in 5 hours of combat. His Marines had maintained disciplined fire had avoided the ammunition wastage that some commanders feared from semi-automatic weapons, had demonstrated that rapid fire could be controlled fire when properly employed. The Japanese positions they had overrun contained abandoned Arisaka rifles, some still loaded, others with bolts open where their owners had died trying to chamber fresh rounds under concentrated American fire. The pattern, established on Saipan, repeated itself across the Pacific as American forces advanced from island to island, each engagement confirming the tactical advantages that semi-automatic rifles provided over bolt-action weapons. Japanese commanders recognized the problem, issued new tactical instructions, developed innovative countermeasures that emphasized night fighting, close-quarters combat, and infiltration tactics designed to negate American fire superiority. But adaptation took time, and time favored the side with superior industrial capacity and unlimited ammunition supplies. Chen cleaned his Garand that evening as artillery fire rumbled across the island, Japanese counterattacks developing against marine positions established during the day's advance. The enemy would come again after dark, would try to exploit terrain and surprise to overcome American firepower advantages, would fight with the desperate courage that made Japanese infantry formidable opponents despite their tactical disadvantages, but they would come with bolt-action rifles, 5 rounds at a time. Manual cycling required for every shot. Chen had 8 rounds ready, 38 clips remaining. Enough firepower to hold whatever ground the Marines had taken. The Japanese counterattack came at 03:15 on June 16th, not across open ground where Garand fire could cut them down, but through a network of caves and tunnels that honeycombed the coral ridge behind Chen's position. No muzzle flashes to target, no clear fields of fire, no opportunity to exploit the semi-automatic advantage that had proven decisive in previous engagements. Chen heard movement in the darkness, boots scraping on coral, equipment rattling softly, whispered commands in Japanese, but he couldn't locate targets for his rifle until enemy soldiers emerged from hidden entrances less than 10 meters from Marine fighting holes. The first Japanese soldier appeared from a cave mouth Chen hadn't known existed, rising from the coral like a ghost, with bayonet fixed to his Arisaka rifle, close enough that Chen could see the man's face in the dim starlight. No time for aimed fire, no opportunity to utilize the Garand's rate of fire advantage, just point-blank combat where reaction time mattered more than weapon capabilities. Chen fired from the hip, the 30-06 round making the Japanese soldier center mass, but 2 more enemy fighters emerged from the same cave before Chen could engage his next target. The semi-automatic cycling that had dominated previous firefights meant nothing at distances measured in arm's length. Gunnery Sergeant Chen realized the Japanese had studied American tactics, had developed countermeasures specifically designed to negate the firepower advantages that M1 rifles provided. Cave fighting eliminated the medium-range engagements where rapid fire proved decisive, forced combat into confined spaces where bolt-action rifles performed as effectively as semi-automatic weapons, neutralized the tactical innovations that had made American infantry superior in open terrain. The enemy had adapted faster than Chen expected. Captain Sakai Oba's guerrilla fighters moved through the tunnel system with practiced efficiency, emerging at calculated intervals to engage Marine positions before disappearing back into the coral labyrinth that connected dozens of hidden positions across the ridge complex. Chen tracked muzzle flashes that appeared and vanished before he could establish firing solutions. Enemy riflemen who fired single shots from concealed positions then withdrew before American return fire could reach them. The Japanese had abandoned the frontal assaults that played to American strengths, had developed tactics that exploited terrain and surprise to overcome firepower disadvantages. The psychological impact reversed itself during the cave fighting. Chen's Marines, accustomed to dominating engagements through superior rates of fire, found themselves reacting to enemy initiatives rather than controlling the tactical rhythm of combat. Japanese soldiers appeared without warning, engaged at point-blank range, then vanished into tunnel systems that Marine maps didn't show and intelligence reports hadn't identified. The Garand's 8-round capacity meant nothing when enemy soldiers fired single-aimed shots, then disappeared before Chen could locate their positions. Chen's section took its first casualties at 0437, when a Japanese infiltration team emerged from a cave entrance directly beneath 2nd Squad's fighting hole, attacking with bayonets and grenades instead of rifle fire, hand-to-hand combat where training and physical strength mattered more than weapon specifications. Corporal Martinez died trying to reload his Garand, not because the rifle malfunctioned, but because a Japanese soldier with a bayonet reached him before he could complete his reload sequence. The weapon that had provided decisive advantages in previous battles became a liability in fighting too close for marksmanship. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito had issued new tactical instructions to his defending forces after studying American assault techniques on previous islands. Recognizing that Japanese infantry couldn't match American firepower in conventional engagements, Saito positioned his main defenses where American advantages became liabilities. Cave systems carved into coral ridgelines provided natural defensive positions that channeled American advances into killing zones where individual courage mattered more than rates of fire, where Japanese soldiers could fight on terms that emphasized their strengths rather than exposing their weaknesses. Chen organized his remaining Marines into fire teams optimized for close-quarters combat, pairing riflemen with automatic weapons and demolition charges to clear cave systems methodically rather than relying on suppressive fire to dominate open-ground engagements. The tactical evolution reflected lessons learned through hard experience. Semi-automatic rifles retained advantages in medium-range fighting, but those advantages disappeared when combat devolved into tunnels and caves, where visibility measured in meters and engagement ranges allowed no time for deliberate marksmanship. American infantry required new techniques to exploit their equipment advantages under modified battlefield conditions. The cave clearing began at 0600 hours with Chen's fire team advancing into the tunnel system that had produced the night's infiltration attacks. M1 Garands, supplemented by Thompson submachine guns and Bangalore torpedoes, designed for close-range demolition work. The tunnels extended 30 meters into solid coral, wide enough for single-file movement, tall enough for a crouching man, illuminated by flashlights that provided both visibility and target designation for enemy riflemen, positioned in defensive alcoves carved into the tunnel walls. Chen encountered the first Japanese position 12 meters into the main tunnel. A fighting hole excavated into the left wall with clear fields of fire down the approach corridor. Manned by a soldier armed with an Arisaka rifle and sufficient ammunition to sustain defensive fire for extended periods. The range was 8 meters, point blank by infantry standards, close enough that weapon cycling time became irrelevant and marksmanship reduced to simple point-and-shoot techniques. Chen fired first his Garand's semi-automatic action, providing no meaningful advantage over the defender's bolt-action rifle in an engagement that lasted 3 seconds from first contact to resolution. The tunnel fighting continued for 2 hours, Chen's team advancing meter by meter through coral passages that negated every tactical advantage American forces had developed during 18 months of Pacific combat. Japanese defenders fought from prepared positions optimized for close-range engagements, using terrain that eliminated the fields of fire necessary for suppressive fire techniques, forcing American infantry to clear each position through direct assault rather than the fire and movement tactics that had proven effective in open terrain. The Garand remained a superior weapon, but its superiority meant nothing in fighting where engagement ranges precluded the rapid fire that made semi-automatic rifles decisive. Chen lost 2 more Marines clearing the tunnel system. Privates Johnson and Kowalski, both killed by Japanese riflemen who fired single shots at ranges too close to miss, then died when American return fire reached their positions microseconds later. The exchange rate favored neither side in fighting where accuracy mattered more than rate of fire, where defensive positions provided equal protection for bolt-action and semi-automatic rifles, where tactical skill rather than equipment specifications determined outcomes. Chen realized the Japanese had found ways to neutralize American firepower advantages through careful selection of battlefields that played to their strengths. The ridge complex fell at 1400 hours after Marine engineers demolished the main cave entrances with shaped charges that sealed the tunnel system permanently, cutting off Japanese defenders from their supply routes and communication networks while eliminating the tactical advantages that underground fighting provided. Chen's company suffered 12 casualties, clearing positions that would have been overrun in minutes during open ground fighting, losses that reflected the reduced effectiveness of American weapons and tactics when employed in terrain that negated their inherent advantages. Chen counted his remaining ammunition as his section consolidated defensive positions on the captured ridge. 16 clips, expended during 8 hours of combat, most fired at ranges under 20 meters, where the Garand's semi-automatic capabilities provided minimal advantages over bolt-action rifles. The Japanese had demonstrated tactical flexibility that American commanders hadn't anticipated, had shown the ability to adapt their fighting methods to neutralize superior American firepower, had proven that weapon advantages could be overcome through intelligent use of terrain and innovative tactical techniques. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The coral ridges of Saipan stretched ahead for miles, each position potentially defended by Japanese forces who had learned to fight differently, who understood American capabilities, and had developed countermeasures that reduced the effectiveness of semi-automatic rifles in carefully chosen conditions. Chen cleaned his Garand mechanically, checking the gas cylinder and trigger mechanism, while considering the tactical implications of an enemy who refused to fight on American terms. The weapon remained superior, but superiority meant nothing if the enemy could choose when and where to engage. The mass assault began at 0200 hours on June 18th, 1944, not with the careful infiltration tactics that had bloodied Chen's section in the caves, but with the largest banzai charge the Japanese 43rd Division could assemble from their remaining strength on Saipan. Lieutenant General Saito had committed every available rifleman to a final desperate attack designed to break through American lines before dawn. 3,700 Japanese soldiers advancing across 800 meters of open sugarcane field in a human wave that stretched from the coastal road to the base of Mount Tapuchau. Chen heard them coming before he saw them, thousands of boots trampling through cane stalks, officers shouting commands in Japanese, the metallic clicking of bayonets being fixed to Arisaka rifles as enemy soldiers prepared for close combat. The Japanese had abandoned the careful tactics that had neutralized American firepower advantages in the cave fighting, had returned to the frontal assault doctrine that played directly into the strengths of semi-automatic weapons, had chosen to fight exactly the kind of battle that M1 Garand's dominated completely. 3rd Battalion's defensive line stretched across 1,200 meters of high ground overlooking the cane fields, each Marine position carefully sited to provide interlocking fields of fire across the approaches the Japanese assault would follow. Chen's section occupied the center of the line with clear visibility for 300 meters, enough range to exploit the Garand's rate of fire advantages against targets advancing across open terrain. 40 Marines armed with M1 rifles, 8 Browning automatic rifles, 2 30 caliber machine guns, sufficient ammunition to sustain maximum rates of fire for 30 minutes of continuous combat. The first Japanese soldiers emerged from the cane field at 250 meters, individual figures silhouetted against the starlit sky as they advanced in loose formation toward the Marine positions. Chen counted the enemy strength through his rifle sights. Hundreds of men, visible in the first wave. More movement behind them suggesting follow-on forces prepared to exploit any breakthrough the initial assault achieved. The Japanese moved with disciplined precision despite their desperate circumstances, maintaining formation intervals and fire discipline that demonstrated professional competence even in a forlorn hope attack. Chen waited until the assault wave reached 150 meters, close enough to ensure first-round hits with aimed fire, but far enough to allow multiple clip changes before the enemy could close to hand-to-hand range. The Japanese advanced steadily through the sugarcane stubble, their Arisaka rifles held at high port arms, bayonets gleaming in the pale light as 3,700 men prepared to charge the final 100 meters to the American line. Chen estimated 60 seconds before the leading elements would reach his position. Enough time for 4 complete reloads if his Marines maintained fire discipline and avoided the panic shooting that wasted ammunition. "Fire!" Chen commanded at 0207, his own Garand leading the volley that erupted along the Marine defensive line like a string of firecrackers detonating in sequence. 40 M1 rifles firing 8 rounds each in rapid succession. 320 aimed shots delivered in 15 seconds, followed by the distinctive metallic ping of clips ejecting and the practiced motion of Marines reloading under combat conditions. The Japanese assault wave staggered under the concentrated fire, individual soldiers crumpling to the ground while others stumbled forward through the gaps torn in their formation. The rate of fire differential became devastatingly apparent within seconds of the engagement opening. Chen's Marines fired their second clips while the Japanese struggled to bring their bolt-action rifles into action. Enemy soldiers who survived the initial volley now attempting to return fire with Arisaka rifles that required manual cycling for every shot. A few Japanese riflemen managed to fire back, single shots, carefully aimed. Their bolt actions worked with desperate speed, but their response came too slowly and too weakly to suppress the American positions that continued pouring semi-automatic fire into the advancing mass of enemy infantry. Chen observed the psychological collapse through his rifle sights as the reality of American firepower superiority struck the Japanese assault wave with crushing finality. Enemy soldiers who had trained to exploit the predictable rhythm of bolt-action warfare found themselves facing continuous fire that never paused, never gave them the tactical breathing space their training assumed would exist between enemy volleys. The Japanese advance faltered at 100 meters as leading elements took casualties faster than following troops could fill the gaps, the assault wave losing cohesion under fire, more intense than their commanders had calculated possible. Captain Sakai Oba's reserve company attempted to maintain the attack's momentum, advancing through the casualties of the first wave while firing their Arisaka rifles from the hip in a desperate attempt to suppress the Marine positions long enough for surviving Japanese soldiers to close to bayonet range. Chen's section concentrated their fire on the fresh enemy troops, 8 Marines, firing coordinated volleys that cut down the Japanese reserves before they could advance 50 meters from their jump-off positions. The semi-automatic Garands delivered sustained, accurate fire that no bolt-action force could match, rate of fire superiority that translated directly into tactical dominance. The third Japanese wave never materialized. Enemy soldiers who had survived the destruction of the first 2 assault groups took cover in the sugarcane stubble, individual riflemen firing single shots at the Marine line, while the bulk of Saito's remaining strength retreated towards prepared positions in the island's mountainous interior. Chen counted muzzle flashes from enemy rifles, perhaps 30 individual weapons still in action, scattered across 800 meters of battlefield, firing at rates that posed no meaningful threat to Marine positions defended by automatic weapons and semi-automatic rifles. Chen's ammunition expenditure during the 20-minute engagement totaled 18 clips, 144 rounds of 30-06 fired at targets ranging from 50 to 250 meters. His section had maintained disciplined fire throughout the action, avoiding the ammunition wastage that prolonged combat could produce, demonstrating that rapid, semi-automatic fire could be controlled fire when employed by trained riflemen against appropriate targets. The Japanese assault had collapsed not because of superior American courage or better training, but because bolt-action rifles could not compete with semi-automatic weapons in sustained firefights across open terrain. The battlefield silence that followed the failed assault carried an ominous finality that Chen recognized from previous engagements where Japanese forces had committed their reserves to desperate attacks. Enemy casualties littered the sugarcane field in windrows that marked the furthest advance each assault wave had achieved before American firepower stopped their progress. Arisaka rifles scattered among the dead and wounded where their owners had fallen, trying to close with bayonets against Marines who could fire 8 times faster than bolt-action weapons allowed. Chen walked the battlefield at first light, counting enemy dead, examining the rifles they had carried into their final attack. Most Arisaka rifles remained loaded, their owners killed before they could fire the single shots their weapons would have delivered if American semi-automatic fire had given them time to aim and shoot. A few Japanese soldiers had managed to work their bolts and chamber fresh rounds, but none had fired more than 3 shots before Chen's Marines cut them down with concentrated Garand fire that arrived faster than bolt-action rifles could respond. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Puller visited Chen's section during the casualty count, examining the tactical results that confirmed American firepower superiority in the most definitive terms possible. 3,700 enemy soldiers, Puller noted, studying the intelligence estimates. 12 Marine casualties, all minor wounds. The exchange rate reflected the fundamental advantage that semi-automatic rifles provided over bolt-action weapons when employment conditions favored rapid fire over precision marksmanship, when tactical situations allowed American forces to fight the kind of battle their equipment dominated completely. Chen cleaned his Garand as burial details processed the Japanese dead, the rifle's action functioning smoothly after firing 144 rounds in sustained combat. No malfunctions or stoppages that could have compromised his section's firepower during critical moments of the engagement. The weapon had performed exactly as designed, had delivered the rate of fire advantages that American doctrine expected, had proven itself superior to bolt-action rifles under conditions where superiority mattered most. The Japanese had learned what concentrated semi-automatic fire could accomplish. They would never forget the lesson. Chen received his orders for Okinawa on February 28th, 1945. Promotion to Master Sergeant effective immediately. Assignment as Platoon Sergeant for 1st Platoon, Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment. The transport, USS Henrico, carried his unit north from Saipan through waters where Japanese submarines still hunted American convoys. The troop ship zigzagging through the Philippine Sea while Chen studied intelligence reports that described the largest Japanese defensive complex the Pacific War had produced. 450 square miles of fortified terrain, 120,000 enemy troops commanded by Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima. Defensive positions under construction since 1944, using forced labor and military engineers who understood exactly what American amphibious assaults could accomplish. The Japanese had learned every lesson the Pacific Campaign offered. Cave systems carved deep into Okinawa's limestone ridges neutralized American artillery and naval gunfire. Interconnected tunnel networks allowed movement without exposure to air attack. Defensive positions sited to channel American advances into predetermined killing zones where superior firepower meant nothing. Chen read captured documents that detailed Japanese tactical evolution. No more banzai charges, no more frontal assaults against semi-automatic rifles, no more fighting on American terms. The enemy would force close-quarters combat in terrain that negated every advantage M1 Garands had demonstrated in previous campaigns. Chen's platoon landed on Red Beach 1 at 0830 on April 1st, 1945, meeting no resistance. As they advanced inland across ground, the Japanese had deliberately abandoned to draw American forces into the interior, where prepared defenses waited. Beaches that should have been contested lay empty. The coastal positions that intelligence had identified as primary objectives sat vacant. The preliminary bombardment that had pulverized suspected enemy concentrations had struck positions the Japanese had evacuated weeks earlier. Chen recognized the tactical sophistication immediately. The enemy had studied American doctrine, had identified the predictable patterns of amphibious assault, had positioned their main defenses where American advantages became liabilities. The first serious resistance developed on April 5th at a ridge complex the Marines designated Hill 260. Limestone formations rising 80 meters above the surrounding terrain and honeycombed with defensive positions that commanded every approach route for 3 kilometers in all directions. Chen's platoon advanced through a valley that funneled their movement toward Japanese positions optimized for close-range engagement, terrain that eliminated the fields of fire necessary for suppressive fire techniques, ground that forced combat into ranges where Arisaka rifles performed as effectively as semi-automatic weapons. The enemy had chosen their battlefield with calculated precision. Chen established his platoon's base of fire behind coral outcroppings, 60 meters from the base of Hill 260, positioning his Marines to provide covering fire for assault teams armed with flamethrowers and demolition charges. The Japanese positions remained invisible until muzzle flashes revealed individual fighting holes carved into the limestone face, enemy riflemen firing single-aimed shots from concealed positions that offered complete protection from return fire. Chen counted 12 separate firing points, each manned by soldiers with clear fields of fire down the approaches his Marines would have to cross, each position supporting the others in an interlocking defensive scheme that channeled American advances into predetermined kill zones. The assault began at 1400 hours with Chen's first squad advancing under covering fire from the remaining Marines. Automatic weapons and semi-automatic rifles delivering suppressive fire against known enemy positions, while riflemen with Bangalore torpedoes maneuvered toward the limestone face. Japanese defenders responded with disciplined fire. Individual riflemen shooting from positions that provided both concealment and protection, enemy soldiers who fired 1 or 2 aimed shots, then shifted to alternate positions before American return fire could reach their original locations. The tactical evolution was complete. Japanese infantry no longer tried to match American rates of fire. Instead, they exploited terrain that made rapid fire irrelevant. Private First Class Kowalski reached the base of the ridge at 1423, carrying demolition charges designed to seal cave entrances and eliminate Japanese firing positions, advancing under covering fire that had failed to suppress enemy positions, effectively due to the protection limestone formations provided. A Japanese rifleman, armed with an Arisaka rifle, engaged Kowalski from a position 12 meters above his location. Single shot fired with deliberate precision at a range where bolt-action cycling time meant nothing and accuracy determined outcomes. Kowalski fell with the Bangalore torpedo still strapped to his pack. The assault stalled 30 meters from its objective by enemy fire that Chen's Marines couldn't suppress with their semi-automatic weapons. Chen reorganized his attack, concentrating his automatic weapons on identified enemy positions while sending fire teams around both flanks of the ridge complex to locate alternate approaches that might avoid the interlocking fields of fire Japanese defenders had established. The tactical problem required infantry skills rather than superior firepower. Reconnaissance, maneuver, coordination between supporting and assaulting elements, techniques that emphasized training and leadership over equipment advantages. The M1 Garand remained a superior weapon, but its superiority meant nothing in terrain that negated the rapid-fire capabilities that made semi-automatic rifles decisive in previous engagements. The flanking movement succeeded at 1547 when Corporal Martinez discovered a ravine that provided concealed access to the reverse slope of Hill 260, dead ground. The Japanese defenders couldn't observe from their primary positions terrain that allowed American forces to approach the ridge complex from an unexpected direction. Chen's second squad advanced through the ravine while his remaining Marines maintained suppressive fire against the forward Japanese positions, coordinated movement that exploited tactical techniques rather than firepower advantages, infantry tactics that worked regardless of weapon specifications or rates of fire. Japanese resistance collapsed when Marines appeared on the reverse slope of Hill 260 at 1615. Enemy soldiers caught between American forces attacking from 2 directions simultaneously, defensive positions that had been optimized for frontal assault suddenly vulnerable to flank attack from terrain the defenders hadn't anticipated American forces could reach. Chen's platoon overran the ridge complex in 12 minutes of close-quarters fighting, casualties light, because tactical skill had overcome the advantages Japanese defensive positions provided. because American infantry had adapted their techniques to fight effectively under conditions where superior firepower alone couldn't guarantee success. Chen counted Japanese casualties as his platoon consolidated their positions on the captured ridge. 18 enemy dead, most killed by rifle fire at ranges under 20 meters, some killed by grenades and automatic weapons during the final assault on the reverse slope positions. The enemy had fought courageously, had used terrain and defensive preparation to neutralize American firepower advantages, had forced close-quarters combat where individual skill mattered more than weapon specifications, but they had lost because American infantry had developed tactical flexibility that complemented their equipment advantages, had learned to fight effectively under diverse conditions rather than relying solely on superior rates of fire. The captured ridge provided Chen's company with observation over the next valley, terrain that revealed the full extent of Japanese defensive preparations across southern Okinawa. Limestone ridges extended to the horizon, each position fortified according to lessons learned from previous defeats, defensive complexes that would require coordinated infantry assault supported by artillery, airstrikes, and naval gunfire, rather than simple frontal attacks by riflemen with semi-automatic weapons. The Japanese had transformed the battlefield into conditions where American advantages became less decisive, where tactical skill would determine outcomes as much as superior firepower. Chen established his platoon's defensive positions as evening approached, posting sentries who could observe the approaches to Hill 260, while the remaining Marines rested and cleaned their weapons after 8 hours of sustained combat. The M1 Garand had performed well during the day's fighting, had provided the reliability and accuracy that American infantry expected, had demonstrated its continued superiority over bolt-action rifles when tactical conditions permitted its employment according to design specifications. But the weapon alone hadn't won the ridge. Tactical skill, coordination, and infantry techniques had overcome Japanese advantages in terrain and defensive preparation. The war continued across Okinawa's limestone ridges, each position requiring similar combinations of firepower and tactical competence, each battle demonstrating that American infantry had evolved beyond simple reliance on superior weapons toward comprehensive tactical systems that integrated equipment advantages with professional competence. Chen wrote in his field diary that evening, "The rifle gave us the chance. Our training and courage did the rest. The M1 Garand remained decisive, but only when employed by Marines who understood that weapons alone never won battles." The final phase of the Okinawa campaign revealed both the enduring advantages and the practical limitations of semi-automatic rifle technology when confronted with an enemy who had learned to fight on their own terms. Chen's platoon spent April and May of 1945 clearing ridge after ridge, each engagement teaching new lessons about the relationship between firepower, superiority, and tactical effectiveness. The Japanese defensive strategy had evolved into something approaching tactical genius within the constraints of their limited resources. Lieutenant General Ushijima's forces refused to defend fixed positions where American firepower could be concentrated. Instead, they fought from interconnected cave systems that allowed tactical withdrawal when positions became untenable, preserving combat power for subsequent defensive lines rather than sacrificing troops in futile last stands. Chen's Marines found themselves fighting not for terrain, but for incremental attrition, measuring progress in casualties inflicted rather than ground captured. The Garand's rate of fire advantage remained relevant, but its tactical impact diminished when the enemy controlled engagement ranges and could break contact before American firepower achieved decisive effects. On April 23rd, Chen's platoon assaulted a position designated Sugarloaf Hill, a modest limestone ridge that anchored the Japanese defensive system, protecting the approaches to Shuri Castle. The hill had changed hands 11 times in 4 days, each side feeding fresh troops into a killing ground where tactical advantages evaporated in close-quarters combat that reduced warfare to its most primitive elements. Chen led his platoon up the forward slope at 0600 hours, advancing through terrain cratered by naval gunfire and littered with the wreckage of previous assaults. Japanese defenders occupied positions carved into the reverse slope, firing points that provided complete protection from American supporting fires, while maintaining clear fields of fire across the approaches Marines would have to cross. The assault reached the crest at 0623. Chen's Marines firing their Garands at targets that appeared and disappeared within seconds. Enemy riflemen who emerged from cave entrances to fire single shots before withdrawing into tunnels too deep for grenades or satchel charges to reach effectively. The rate of fire advantage that had proven decisive at Guadalcanal and Saipan meant nothing when targets presented themselves for 3 seconds at ranges measured in meters. Private Davis fell at 0627, killed by a Japanese rifleman who fired one carefully aimed shot from a cave entrance 15 meters away, then vanished before return fire could reach his position. The enemy soldier had worked his Arisaka bolt once, lifted, pulled back, pushed forward, locked down, but in close-quarters cave fighting, that single shot was sufficient. Chen realized the Japanese had achieved tactical parity through intelligent use of terrain, had created conditions where the mechanical differences between semi-automatic and bolt-action rifles became tactically irrelevant, where survival depended on alertness and aggression rather than rates of fire. The platoon held Sugarloaf's Crest for 47 minutes before Japanese counterattacks forced them to withdraw. Chen counted his casualties during the retreat: 3 dead, 7 wounded, ammunition expenditure averaging 12 clips per man, 144 rounds fired for 47 minutes of contested ground, a tactical exchange rate that would have been unthinkable in the open terrain fighting of earlier campaigns. The industrial advantage that American production provided remained significant, but its tactical impact diminished when combat devolved into grinding attrition, where both sides accepted horrific casualties to contest positions of marginal strategic value. The Garand's superiority persisted, but superiority measured in rounds per minute meant less when engagements lasted seconds and target exposure permitted only single shots regardless of weapon type. Lieutenant Colonel Puller visited Chen's position on May 2nd, studying casualty reports that documented the changing character of the campaign. "They've learned," Puller observed, examining Chen's after-action report, "learned to fight where our advantages don't matter as much, but they're still losing." The observation captured the essential reality of the Pacific War's final phase. Japanese forces had developed tactical methods that reduced American firepower advantages, had learned to fight effectively despite inferior equipment, had demonstrated tactical flexibility that prolonged resistance far beyond what industrial comparisons suggested possible. But adaptation couldn't overcome the fundamental arithmetic of attrition warfare. American industry produced 5 million Garands. Japanese factories managed perhaps 2 million Arisaka rifles under increasingly difficult conditions. American logistics delivered unlimited ammunition to frontline units. Japanese supply lines collapsed under submarine interdiction and aerial bombardment. The enemy could neutralize firepower advantages in individual engagements, but they couldn't sustain resistance when every tactical success cost irreplaceable casualties and consumed ammunition they couldn't replace. Chen's platoon participated in the final assault on Shuri Castle on May 27th, advancing through ruins where organized Japanese resistance had collapsed into small unit actions by isolated defenders cut off from command and resupply. The fighting remained intense, but its character had changed from coordinated defense to desperate last stands by soldiers who understood the war was lost, but refused to surrender. Chen encountered a Japanese rifleman in the ruins of a machine gun bunker at 1400 hours. The enemy soldier, a corporal according to his insignia, sat with his back against the concrete wall, his Arisaka rifle across his knees, 5 rounds still loaded in the internal magazine. The man made no move to raise his weapon as Chen approached, simply watched with exhausted eyes that had seen too much combat. Chen kept his Garand trained on the Japanese corporal while calling for his interpreter. The conversation that followed, translated haltingly through Private Yamamoto's limited Japanese, revealed the psychological dimension of the firepower differential that statistics couldn't capture. "Your rifle," the Japanese corporal said, gesturing toward Chen's Garand. 8 bullets. No stopping. We knew about this weapon. Trained to fight against it, but knowing is different from experiencing. When you hear that sound, ping, 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 and you're working your bolt, trying to chamber your second round, and you know the next bullet is already coming, that changes everything. The corporal paused, studying his own rifle with something approaching affection. This rifle is reliable, accurate. I could hit targets at 500 meters if given time to aim properly. But time was the one thing your rifle never gave us. By the time I chambered my second round, you had fired your 5th, 6th, 7th shot. The mathematics of survival became impossible. Chen asked why the Japanese hadn't developed their own semi-automatic rifles, given that the technology existed and the tactical disadvantages were apparent. The corporal's response revealed the industrial constraints that shaped Japanese military doctrine as much as tactical considerations. "We discussed this in training," the corporal explained. "Our instructors told us semi-automatic rifles require precision manufacturing, expensive machining, tight tolerances that our factories couldn't maintain, while also producing aircraft, artillery, ships, ammunition. Your country chose to invest in expensive rifles for every soldier. Our country chose to invest in other weapons. Perhaps if we had won quickly, as our generals predicted, the choice would have been vindicated. But the war lasted longer than the rifles we could produce." The conversation ended when Chen's squad leader arrived with orders to move forward. The Japanese corporal was processed as a prisoner of war, one of the relatively few enemy soldiers who survived long enough to surrender. Chen never learned what happened to him after that day, but the conversation remained vivid in memory, a rare moment of human connection across the industrial and cultural divide that separated combatants in the Pacific War. The Okinawa campaign officially ended on June 21, 1945, though isolated Japanese resistance continued for weeks afterward. Chen's platoon had sustained 43% casualties during 82 days of sustained combat, a rate of attrition that reflected both the intensity of Japanese resistance and the tactical evolution that had made every yard of progress costly despite American advantages in firepower and logistics. The statistical analysis, conducted by Marine Corps historians after the war, documented the M1 Garand's tactical impact with precision that field reports couldn't capture. American rifle squads in the Pacific Theater averaged 42 rounds fired per enemy casualty inflicted, compared to historical averages of 85 rounds per casualty for bolt-action rifles in previous conflicts. The improvement reflected not just the Garand's rate of fire, but the tactical confidence semi-automatic capability provided Marines who could fire rapidly without losing sight, picture-engaged targets more aggressively than soldiers who needed to work bolts between shots. Japanese forces adapted their tactics progressively throughout the war, but adaptation couldn't fully compensate for the fundamental disadvantage of bringing bolt-action rifles to fights where the enemy carried semi-automatic weapons. By war's end, Japanese infantry doctrine had evolved to emphasize night attacks, infiltration tactics, cave fighting, and suicide missions, tactical methods that either negated American firepower advantages or accepted horrific casualty rates as the price of engaging American forces on any terms. The industrial dimension of the firepower differential extended beyond the rifles themselves to encompass ammunition production, logistics, and the training pipelines that maintained unit effectiveness despite continuous casualties. American factories produced 8 billion rounds of .30-06 ammunition during the war years, enough to sustain the high rates of fire that semi-automatic rifles made possible. Japanese ammunition production struggled to meet even the modest requirements of bolt-action weapons, with quality control problems increasing as the war progressed and raw materials became scarce. Chen received his discharge papers on November 20th, 1945, processing out of the Marine Corps at Camp Pendleton, where he had learned to shoot the Garand 4 years earlier. The rifle that had accompanied him through Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Saipan, and Okinawa was turned into the armory, its serial number recorded, its condition assessed, its history reduced to maintenance records that noted only malfunctions and parts replacements. The weapon had fired approximately 4,000 rounds during Chen's service, had cycled flawlessly, except for one broken extractor on Bougainville, had delivered exactly the performance American industry had promised when Springfield Armory designed it in the 1930s. The rifle had been, in General George Patton's famous assessment, the greatest battle implement ever devised. But Chen understood that the implement's greatness derived not from mechanical superiority alone, but from the industrial system that could produce 5 million copies and the tactical doctrine that employed them effectively. The Japanese had fought with courage, skill, and tactical innovation that commanded respect from every Marine who faced them in combat. But they had fought with bolt-action rifles against semi-automatic weapons, had accepted a fundamental disadvantage that tactical adaptations could mitigate but never fully overcome. The war in the Pacific had been decided by many factors: industrial capacity, logistics, air power, naval superiority, cryptographic advantages. But the M1 Garand's dominance over the Arisaka rifle in close-quarters infantry combat represented one variable where American superiority was absolute and measurable. Chen returned to civilian life in San Francisco, enrolled in college on the GI Bill, eventually became a high school history teacher who occasionally spoke to students about his wartime experiences. He kept no souvenirs from the war, wanted no reminders of the caves and ridges where so many men had died, but he remembered the Garand with something approaching gratitude. Not for the enemy soldiers it had killed, but for the Marines it had kept alive through 4 years of combat where firepower superiority often meant the difference between survival and catastrophe. The Japanese soldier Chen had captured at Shuri Castle had understood something profound about the nature of modern warfare. The war had become a contest not just of courage or tactical skill, but of industrial systems and the choices those systems made about resource allocation. Japan had chosen to invest in naval aviation, in battleships and carriers, in the weapons that would supposedly win a short, decisive war. America had chosen to invest in semi-automatic rifles for every infantryman, in the unglamorous infantry weapons that would matter in the long, grinding campaigns that the war actually became. By the time Japanese military planners recognized their error, by the time they understood that the Pacific War would be decided in jungle clearings and on coral ridges where rifle squads fought desperate close-quarters battles, it was too late to retool their factories or retrain their infantry in new weapons. The Arisaka remained in production until the war's end, reliable and accurate but fundamentally obsolete against opponents who could fire 8 rounds in the time it took to cycle a bolt twice. The tactical lessons of the M1 Garand's superiority over bolt-action rifles influenced military thinking worldwide after 1945. Soviet forces adopted semi-automatic rifles despite significant manufacturing challenges. British forces transitioned away from bolt actions. Even nations with limited industrial capacity recognized that semi-automatic rifles represented the minimum acceptable standard for infantry weapons in modern warfare. The Japanese self-defense forces, established after the war under American guidance, equipped their infantry with semi-automatic and automatic rifles from their inception, the lessons of the Pacific War having been learned too expensively to ignore. Chen died in 1997 at age 76, his obituary in the San Francisco Chronicle noting his service in the Pacific but providing no details of the battles he had fought or the weapon he had carried. His children, sorting through his belongings, found a single wartime photograph. Chen as a young sergeant on Guadalcanal, his M1 Garand slung over his shoulder, his expression serious but not grim, standing beside his fire team in front of their tents. The rifle in that photograph represented more than individual marksmanship or mechanical engineering. It embodied an industrial philosophy that valued equipping every soldier with the best available weapons, a logistics system capable of supplying those weapons with unlimited ammunition, and a tactical doctrine that understood firepower superiority could be trained, standardized, and replicated across millions of infantrymen. The Japanese had understood all of this by 1944, had recognized their disadvantage, had adapted their tactics as best they could within the constraints of their industrial capacity and military culture. But understanding couldn't overcome the fundamental mathematics of combat, where one side fired 8 rounds to the other's 5, where reloading took 4 seconds instead of 15, where suppressive fire was sustained rather than sporadic. The M1 Garand won no battles by itself. Battles were won by Marines who fought with courage, skill, and determination under conditions that tested human endurance to its limits. But those Marines fought with a weapon that gave them decisive advantages at the critical moments when infantry combat reduced to its essentials. Who could deliver accurate fire fastest when targets appeared without warning and survival measured in seconds? The Japanese couldn't believe American Marines' M1 Garand fired 8 rounds while their Type 38 had but belief was irrelevant. The mathematics of firepower were absolute, and those mathematics shaped every infantry engagement from Guadalcanal to Okinawa. The side with semi-automatic rifles held advantages that tactical skill could mitigate but never fully overcome. That was the lesson Chen and 10,000 other Marines learned in jungles and on ridges across the Pacific, the lesson that Japanese infantry learned at terrible cost, the lesson that changed infantry warfare forever. The war ended not because of any single weapon or tactical innovation, but because of the cumulative effect of hundreds of advantages in industry, logistics, technology, and training. The M1 Garand represented one advantage among many, but it was an advantage that mattered at the level where wars are actually fought. In the desperate close-range firefights where infantrymen face each other across distances, measured in meters, and survival depends on who can shoot faster without sacrificing accuracy. Chen understood this. The Japanese corporal at Shuri understood this. Every infantryman who fought in the Pacific understood this, though they might express it differently. The greatest battle implement ever devised earned its reputation not in firing range demonstrations or engineering specifications, but in the mud and coral and limestone caves where American Marines fought Japanese soldiers in conditions that tested weapons and men to absolute limits. The Garand passed that test. The Arisaka, reliable and accurate as it was, could not overcome the fundamental disadvantage of requiring manual bolt operation for every shot. That difference, measured in seconds and rounds per minute, shaped the tactical reality of Pacific combat as surely as geography or weather or command decisions. The war that Chen fought was ultimately a war of industrial systems, but those systems manifested at the most personal level imaginable. 2 men facing each other at lethal range, each trying to fire first, one with a weapon that cycled automatically, one with a weapon that required manual operation between shots. In that moment, industrial philosophy became personal survival, and the side with better weapons had better chances. That was the truth the Japanese couldn't believe until they experienced it. That was the advantage American industry provided to every Marine who carried a Garand into combat. That was the difference between 8 rounds and 5, between semi-automatic and bolt action, between the war America prepared to fight and the war Japan wished it was fighting. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.